And as I was reading John chapter 13, verses 34, 35, and onward, I saw an interesting trend here. And it's very interesting to see how this conversation about love goes over people's heads. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Jesus talked to the disciples, if you look in verse 33, and he's talking to them, and he says that he will be with them only for a little while longer, and where he's going, they cannot come. Then in verse 34 and 35, he tells them that everyone will know them if they have love for one another. And then in verse 36, if you look in verse 36, Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" This is a very good example of what I was talking about. Jesus is talking about love and everything, and Peter is saying, he's going back to verse 33, "Lord, but where are you going?" Instead of saying, "What is this love all about?" and start talking about love, it goes over Peter's head. He says, "Lord, never mind this talk about loving one another. Just tell us, where are you going?" People are always intrigued by the unknown. To the disciples, it was intriguing to know about the signs of the times and about when Jesus will come and where he was going. The talks about loving one another and loving others didn't really generate much intrigue and interest and discussion. It was one of those things, okay, we heard this before, let's move on to something more interesting. I think that we are not much different today than the disciples in Jesus' time. Especially us, we as Adventists, are so intrigued by the end times events and the prophecies and the mark of the beast. And when the conversation comes about the mark of discipleship, we're just saying the same, okay, Lord, I heard this before, let's move on to something more intriguing and more interesting. I want to hear something sensational. Let's just talk about the last day events and prophecies, and let's see what the Pope is doing, what the United States is doing, and let's talk about that. Now, don't get me wrong. There is nothing wrong about those last days events. There is nothing wrong about knowing the prophecies. There is nothing wrong about knowing the mark of the beast and watching for those signs and everything, because Jesus told us to watch for those signs. But it's very interesting that Jesus didn't say to us that all will know us, that we're his disciples, by knowing about those things. What did he say? He will know us by what? They will know us by what? By our love to one another. Your knowledge of prophecies is good. Your knowledge of 2300-day prophecy is good, and all these last day events, and that's all good. But people just know us that we are Adventists by those things. They don't know that we're disciples. I believe that we as Adventists should find a balance between talking about the mark of the beast and the mark of true discipleship. We must make sure that we don't ignore one or the other, and it seems to me that we are very good at talking about the mark of the beast, but not about the mark of discipleship, which is love for one another. I really hope that today you're going to take the words of Jesus to heart. I hope that you're not going to be like Peter and let this just go over your head because you heard this so many times. I hope that you'll make a decision to really apply the commandment of Jesus to love one another in your everyday life. As you look back at verse 34 in John chapter 13, Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another even as I have loved you." The important question to ask in this verse, why is Jesus saying that this is a new commandment? The command to love each other is not new in of itself. If you look in the Old Testament, Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 18, it says there, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." It's an old commandment. If we look at the Greek word translated new, it's kainos, and this word speaks of what is new in the sense of unused or fresh, rather than something recent or different. And that a lot of our evangelical friends don't understand that, and they say, this is the new commandment, love one another, and that's it. There is nothing else. There is no other commandments. But this word means something that is fresh and unused. It's not something that is different. It is not so much that commandment hasn't been given before as that it has a different quality about it. A quality of freshness that differentiates it from any other commandments. What appears to be new is the way we are to love, and Jesus qualifies that. He says, love one another as what? As I have loved you. That's what's new in this commandment. It's the qualifying mark how we can love. And Jesus is showing this new commandment has a new measure of loving. How Jesus loved us, that's how we should love one another. Early in chapter 13, Jesus showed us how we can love one another by washing the disciples' feet, and we just have experienced that ourselves. In doing so, Jesus humbled himself and served his disciples. So Jesus wants you and me to sacrificially love other believers. When Jesus says, as I have loved you, he sets himself up as the standard by which his disciples are to forever measure their love for one another. As I sacrificed everything, says Jesus, I'm expecting you to sacrifice everything for one another. In conclusion, in John 13:35, Jesus declares that when we love each other, we will become a magnet to the world. He says, by this all will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Jesus is giving the world the right to examine our credibility. The world can see if we are for real or not. If you and I love one another, everyone will know that we are Jesus' disciples. When we fail to love others, we discredit ourselves as Christians. But most importantly, it's not just ourselves. We discredit the Christian faith in general. Therefore, if we expect unbelievers to know that we are Christ's disciples, we must show the mark, which is love for one another. May God bless you.